Will the real Katharine Hepburn please stand up? We're gonna have a problem here. Hey History Heroes, I'm Tempest and welcome to Time with Tempest, where today we're going to be talking about Katharine Hepburn. No, not that Katharine Hepburn. That Katharine Hepburn. Suffragette leader, co-founder of Planned Parenthood, and mother to, yes, that Oscar-winning actress of the same name. If you want to learn more hidden history, make sure to subscribe, bang that bell, distribute your delight, and leave your calling card in the comments below. Now, let's begin our story. Katharine Martha Houghton was born on February 2nd, 1878 in Buffalo, New York. She was affectionately called Kit and was close with her two younger sisters, Marion and Edith. Her parents were progressive free thinkers, encouraging their daughters to get a thorough education and follow humanist and agnostic ideals. When Katharine was a young teenager, her father committed suicide, which sadly appeared to be a family trait. Tragedy struck again when 2 years later, after her father died, her mother died of stomach cancer. Despite the girls still being teenagers, their mother didn't appoint a legal guardian and instead encouraged them to follow their own path. Their uncle attempted to intervene and send them to a finishing school, but the Houghton girls remained firm and were determined to go to college. Katharine went to college at Bryn Mawr in Pennsylvania. She earned her bachelor's in history and political science in 1899. 1 year later, she got her master's degree in what could have been art history or physics. Regardless, no one could say that Katharine was uneducated, or her sisters for that matter. Both Edith and Marion attended the same college and also got their bachelor's. Edith later enrolled as one of the first female students at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and decided to have a focus on sex education. It is here Katharine met a fellow progressive thinker, Thomas Hepburn, who at that point was just a medical student at the school. They married a year later and moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where Dr. Hepburn worked as a urologist at Hartford Hospital. Together, they had 6 children. The first was Thomas, who tragically committed suicide at the age of 15, something Katharine was all too familiar with. It was her second child, also named Katharine, who found him, and was profoundly affected for the rest of her life by it. This Katharine was the famous Katharine Hepburn we all know. The incident caused her to become reclusive, anxious, and extremely suspicious of people, traits that she carried all her life, despite her being a famous Oscar-winning actress. However, she did use her platform to draw attention to the causes her mother championed. And there were 4 more children in the family as well, with the Hepburns ensuring that they are all raised with the ideals of women's rights and free thought. Side note, there is one movie that actually does depict the Hepburn family called The Aviator, and I recommend you never watch it. It is pure fictional trash, and instead of depicting the Hepburns as a humble and progressive family, it instead depicts them as snobby and close-minded. If you want to learn more about the Hepburns, I highly recommend that you read the memoir of Katharine Hepburn, the actress, which I will link in the description below. As a strong proponent of women's rights, Katharine became interested in the suffrage movement, which, contrary to popular belief, had actually already been going on since the 1840s. However, it was in the early 20th century where things really kicked off, and Katharine joined in by co-founding the Hartford Equal Franchise League in 1909. A year later, it became the Connecticut Women's Suffrage Association and was a branch of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. As the president of the association, she represented the state of Connecticut in a meeting with President Woodrow Wilson. She also hosted the most famous suffragette in history, Emmeline Pankhurst, when she visited Hartford. Despite her efforts with the CWSA, she became disenchanted with the organization, stating that it was old-fashioned and supine. Instead, she joined Alice Paul and her newly formed National Woman Party, which was the foremost suffrage group in America, and renowned for their aggressive tactics, similar to the Women's Social and Political Union in Britain. Suffragettes in the National Woman's Party use any means necessary to fight for the vote. Picketing in front of the White House 24/7 and burning the president's speeches was one of the more iconic tactics, which resulted in many arrests and violence against the suffragettes. Once in prison, they went on hunger strikes to protest, but were beaten, tortured, and force-fed in a horrifying manner. One night, called the Night of Terror, involved 40 prison guards smashing suffragettes' heads against iron beds and benches, chaining them to the ceiling, choking them to the point of unconsciousness, and refusing to give medical treatment to a suffragette who had suffered a heart attack at the sight of her bloodied, nearly deceased cellmate. To evade this fate, some of the suffragettes defended themselves against arrest by learning jujitsu and were known as the jujitsu suffragettes. And while they are still lobbying for the vote, they continued to hold marches, demonstrations, protests, speeches, and more to further their cause. Katharine thrived in the National Woman's Party, and when Alice Paul was interviewed about Hepburn's involvement, she stated Hepburn was the unquestioned leader of the suffragists in Connecticut. She even became in politics at this time, and she acted as a legislative chairman in the National Woman's Party National Executive Committee. Katharine's work also involved women's rights, as the world that Katharine lived in was still one of vast inequality, despite her seemingly free feminist lifestyle. The suffragettes of the 19th and 20th century paved the way for later women's rights movements, laying down the foundation for issues that we used to, and sometimes still, struggle with today. Here are just a few things that women like Katharine could not do in the early 20th century, and I'll also include the dates that they were repealed. You couldn't have your own passport if you were married. Keep your citizenship after marrying a foreigner. Get a loan for your business without a male cosigner. Get a credit card without a male cosigner, usually your husband. Use birth control. Have an abortion. Sue an employer for sexual harassment. Refuse to have sex with your husband. Serve on a jury. Keep a job if you're pregnant and your boss didn't like it. All of Katharine's efforts eventually paid off, and the 19th Amendment was officially ratified in 1920. After that, she was asked to run for the United States Senate. While she was tempted by the offer, and her husband fully supported her, she ultimately declined due to the rigorous campaign it would require. But Katharine was not done trying to change the world, and there was so much more to be done. She became friends with Margaret Sanger, fellow New Yorker and women's rights advocate. Together, they founded the American Birth Control League, which encouraged the opening of birth control clinics and advocated women taking control of their own fertility. Yes, I said they did this together. Pretty much everywhere you look, Margaret Sanger is credited with the sole founding of the American Birth Control League and its later incarnation, which I will discuss in a moment. But in reality, it was a group effort, and Katharine Martha Houghton Hepburn was instrumental in the League's founding. The American Birth Control League's principles were stated as such: "We hold that children could be conceived in love, born of the mother's conscious desire, and only begotten under conditions which render possible the heritage of health. Therefore, we hold that every woman must possess the power and freedom to prevent conception except when these conditions can be satisfied." In the early 1930s, this was a very powerful statement. While there were supportive husbands, like Dr. Hepburn, most were not, and they considered themselves to be the heads of the household and everyone else. Katharine was extremely outspoken, and often traveled around the East Coast giving lectures on women's rights and birth control. She even had speaking engagements at Carnegie Hall in New York City, though she was not always welcome where she went. And at home, the Hartford Courant vilified her and insulted her to such a severe degree, her friends suggested she sue the publication. Bricks were thrown through the windows of her home, and people turned their backs on her and her family. But she persevered, and in 1936, the Comstock Act was overturned in Connecticut, New York, and Vermont, which enabled Katharine and the American Birth Control League to get the word out about their organization. The Comstock Act was a series of laws preventing the use of the mail service to send contraceptives, obscene material, abortion aids, sex toys, personal letters containing sexual content, or any information of the items listed above. This also included information on sexual education, diseases, women's health, and even more vital information that was deemed obscene and immoral by the men in charge, of course. A year after it was overturned in those states, in 1937, the American Medical Association recognized birth control as an integral part of medical practice and education. And just 2 years after that, in 1939, the American Birth Control League formed with a research bureau to create the Birth Control Federation of America. Another 3 years later, in 1942, this became the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, or, as we simply know it today, Planned Parenthood. For those of you that don't know, Planned Parenthood is a US-based nonprofit organization dedicated to women's, men's, and sexual health care, offering a sliding scale to those without insurance. From birth control, to pelvic exams, to STD testing, to prenatal care, to cancer screenings, to abortions, to hormone therapy, the list goes on. It's estimated that at least 1 in 5 American women will use Planned Parenthood in their lifetime. And each year, Planned Parenthood provides healthcare and education to 3.6 million Americans and 1.8 million people internationally. Overall, it's just one of the many incredible legacies of an incredible woman like Katharine Martha Houghton Hepburn. She spent her entire life advocating for others, from fighting for women's right to vote, to ensuring they have control over their own bodies, to helping to found an organization that has helped millions of women with their health. And we owe it to her to exercise the rights that she fought for and others died for. So, on November 3rd, I urge you to cast your vote and let your voice be heard, because it echoes Katharine and so many others who fought for you 100 years ago. Thank you so much for watching. I upload videos every Friday or every other Friday for bigger videos. I will be uploading next Friday, which is the day before Halloween. Get it? Which? Which is the day before Halloween? No? Anyway, it's going to be a very spooky special, featuring what could be a history hoax, paranormal pet, or even a horrifying hallucination. You'll have to watch and come to a conclusion yourself. And remember, if you want to learn more hidden history, make sure to subscribe, bang that bell, distribute your delight, and leave your calling card in the comments below because the YouTube algorithm gods demand it. Until next time, stay curious, history heroes.